A man stood quietly for 20 years, never drawing attention, but when the moment of decision arrived, he did what no one else dared to do, saving a young man from a burning car. But this story is not just about courage. It's about the profound transformation in the heart of a woman who once ignored him. What made her reevaluate and change everything? Can patience and kindness truly transform a life? Join me as we explore this touching story, one about sacrifice, respect, and the powers of simple acts. The sun had not yet risen above the towering skyscrapers, but the warm light from the first rays of sunlight had already filtered through the sharp glass frames of these towering buildings, illuminating a peaceful street in Manhattan. It was a cold autumn morning, with the moist air blending with the stillness of the space, filled with the scent of fallen leaves and a gentle breeze. Yet Parkside Avenue remained bathed in grandeur. Surrounded by luxurious buildings, Parkside Avenue's high-end apartments resembled an oasis of wealth where the rich and successful lived in their own world, enjoying luxuries that few could ever touch. But here within the cold walls of a lavish building, a humble man had spent his life opening the door for others. Jason Carter, a middle-aged man with graying hair at the temples, stood straight in front of the transparent glass door of the Parkside building. It was his job, the sole doorman here, the man standing guard, always waiting for the hurried footsteps of the wealthy residents in their neat uniforms. Whether it was morning or evening rain or shine, he always appeared in his tidy uniform, his black cap perched perfectly on his head, greeting everyone with a special politeness, as if he were a servant trained to the smallest gesture. This job had been his for 20 years since he was young, and now at the age of 50, Jason no longer felt weary of it. He had grown accustomed to the rushed thank yous of the building's residents, and sometimes he received no gratitude at all. To them, he was just a ghost, an invisible door that couldn't be missed as they entered and exited their world. But nothing could change his perspective on the job. Even though no one noticed him, Jason continued his work with an unwavering dedication. To him, the job was a responsibility, a mission to help people, to protect them from the little struggles, and to ensure they didn't have to worry about insignificant details in life. The Parkside Avenue building where Jason worked was not a place that just anyone could enter. It was a high-end residential area with luxurious apartments and state-of-the-art amenities where the wealthy resided. These skyscrapers, with their gleaming facades and glass walls reflecting the passing clouds in the sky, were not merely places to live, but symbols of status and success. Built from marble and glass, the building's entrance was adorned with enormous stone columns with glaring lights above that illuminated the night. The residents here were successful, confident, and carried with them the pride of those who had enough wealth and power. One standout resident was Claire Langford, a woman in her 40s with a distinctive aura. She never appeared without her expensive outfits, her hair always perfectly styled and eyes sharp as knives. Claire was the kind of person who, when people saw her, immediately sensed the power in her every step. Every time she entered the building, those around her automatically made way as if every space was hers. Claire was the mother of Ethan Langford, a 16-year-old teenager who always seemed to lack attention from his mother. Ethan, unlike his mother, was not someone who easily made an impression at first sight. He had a tall physique and a handsome face, but often lived in his own world, talking little and always wearing headphones. He wasn't someone who could easily communicate with his mother, but what he always felt was missing was the care and attention from Claire. However, he never protested. He simply sensed the coldness in their relationship. Jason Carter, whose humility and quiet nature never sought the spotlight, had witnessed the cold interactions between Claire and Ethan many times. They were people living under the same roof, but they seemed to belong to two different worlds. Despite this, Ethan occasionally spent a brief moment talking to Jason about the books he was reading, works by Langston Hughes. a poet that Jason admired. He never truly understood why Jason spent so much time reading such poetry, but every time they met, he felt that Jason, with all his patience, was always ready to share about the books he loved. It was a fragile connection, but it was the only thing that allowed Ethan to feel he could engage with the world around him. However, Jason Carter and Claire Langford were two individuals who almost never interacted directly. Their relationship was simply one of parallel existence in life, with no overlap except for polite greetings when Claire passed by the door where Jason stood. This setting unfolded within the stillness of the Parkside Avenue building, a space of wealth and indifference. Each day passed with hurried footsteps, elevators gliding with busy people and lights that never went out highlighting the division between two worlds. The world of the wealthy and those like Jason, always on the outside of their lives, invisible until an event occurred. One ordinary autumn day, just like any other, while the residents of Parkside Avenue began their busy lives, an encounter that seemed like any other would spark a major change in this story. Claire Langford, as usual, appeared in her luxurious outfit wearing an expensive down coat, briskly walking down the corridor of the building. She was the kind of woman who attracted attention wherever she went, and it was no surprise that people around her instinctively stepped aside. However, in Claire's world, there was one person she always saw as a part of the space, a part of the building, never paying attention to him, but never stopping her criticism either. Jason Carter, the doorman, was just another part of that atmosphere, a man she had never truly seen. Every time she passed, Jason Clare never forgot to raise an eyebrow, giving him a mocking smile. She had a habit of mocking those she considered inferior to herself, and Jason was one of them. While in his eyes she was a polite person in hers, he was just a man with a mundane job. "Still reading those old books?" Claire once asked with a mocking tone as she passed by Jason one morning, her eyes not stopping to meet his. "Yes, ma'am," Jason replied, not showing any irritation, still smiling lightly as he always did. "They help entertain me during my free time." "I suppose so," Claire muttered, shaking her head and stepping into the elevator without paying attention to Jason's silence. She never cared about the stories he shared, the books he read, or the long days he stood there committed to his job. However, Ethan Clare's son was the only one in the family who looked at Jason differently. The boy, although never showing direct attention, always quietly noticed the small details that others often overlooked. Ethan was not one to easily accept his mother's world, and he could clearly see the difference in Claire's attitude toward Jason and how he himself viewed the doorman. Jason was not just a doorman, but also someone who had shared with Ethan the works of Langston Hughes, a poet that Jason deeply admired. The story of Hughes, with his humanistic poems, filled with beliefs and hopes in life, seemed non-existent in Claire's world. Ethan, though silent, found a connection with Jason through such simple stories. Still, Ethan's world could not avoid the influence of his mother. He witnessed his mother mocking Jason, and although he never spoke out, he felt a discomfort and unease in his heart. But he couldn't say anything because he didn't know how to confront his mother. He could only remain silent occasionally, looking at Jason with eyes full of empathy, yet unable to change anything. But that peaceful moment did not last long. One autumn morning around 7 a.m., as Jason stood in his usual spot, something unusual began to happen. A thin column of black smoke appeared from a car parked near the sidewalk. At first, Jason thought it was just a broken-down vehicle, but then the smoke began to thicken with a burning odor. He squinted, trying to assess the situation, but when the smoke started billowing stronger, he realized something was wrong. He hurried toward the car, a growing sense of unease rising within him. And immediately he noticed a figure inside the vehicle, a person sitting motionless, head leaning to one side, eyes half closed. It was Ethan Langford. The sight made Jason's heart stop. Ethan Clare's son was in the burning car. There was no time to think. Without hesitation, Jason rushed toward the car, his hands trembling but determined. He began to pound on the car window with the last of his strength. "Ethan, Ethan!" he shouted in desperation, but no answer came. Thick smoke began to invade the surroundings and the car burst into flames. Jason didn't think any further. He used his sleeve to cover his hand and struck the window hard, shattering it with a sharp screech. When the window shattered, he rushed in, grabbing Ethan with one hand and pulling him out, ignoring the pain from the broken glass, ignoring the flames that were almost engulfing the car. Finally, Jason managed to pull Ethan out and held him tightly, despite the wounds and the pain spreading throughout his body. Passers-by began to gather, pulling out their phones to film shouting loudly, but Jason paid no attention. He only looked at Ethan, still holding him tightly, checking his breathing until the rescue team arrived. But just then, Claire appeared. The sound of her high heels echoed in the silence, and when she saw her son in Jason's arms, her expression changed rapidly. Her eyes were full of confusion, fear, and disbelief. First came surprise, then shame. She stood there silently, unable to speak. When her eyes met Jason's, all she could say was, "I didn't know." Her voice trembled, full of guilt. But Jason didn't wait for her thanks. He quietly placed Ethan down and stepped back, allowing the rescue team to take him. He turned and walked away, not a word spoken, not a glance back, as if everything he did was just part of his job, a job he had accepted long ago. And from that moment, everything changed. Jason's story, a simple man unnoticed by anyone, became a major story that made people stop and think. The story of the man who had been looked down upon, but saved a life about courage and sacrifice, without the need for recognition. And for Claire Langford, the woman who had once looked down on Jason, that moment had changed everything. After the rescue team took Ethan to the hospital, Claire Langford still stood there, unable to move, as if her vast world had suddenly shrunk. She couldn't understand what had just happened. Everything had occurred too quickly, without preparation. It was only then that the mixed emotions began to rise in her. She saw Jason, the one she had mocked, belittled for so long, was the only one who didn't hesitate to jump into danger to save her son. Claire couldn't utter a word. She just stood there, her gaze following Jason as he quietly turned and walked away. His footsteps were firm, unwavering, as if nothing could shake the calm and determination in him. It was that very calmness that made Claire feel more ashamed than ever. She didn't know what to do, what to say to him, or even to herself. Never in her life had Claire felt as bad as she did now. She was a successful, confident woman, always in control of everything in her life. But today she realized that that control had been a lie, and she had failed to see what truly mattered, the simple human values she had unintentionally ignored. After the ambulance took Ethan to the hospital, Claire rushed to follow. But inside, she was not just worried about her son, but also about the way she had viewed Jason all this time. She felt a change in her heart. She had once thought that people like Jason, those doing his kind of work, were invisible, unworthy of attention or respect. But now, when she looked back at his actions in saving her son, she realized she had been wrong. With these thoughts, Claire waited anxiously for Ethan to wake up in his hospital room. The boy was breathing weakly, still affected by the smoke and suffering minor burns. However, the doctor said he would recover completely. Claire couldn't stop thinking about Jason, the man she had once looked down on, but the very man who had saved her son in that dangerous moment. Her logic couldn't explain the betrayal in the way she had treated him and the sacrifice he made for her family. As Ethan slowly woke up, he looked at his mother with an unmistakable expression. He didn't speak much, but his look showed weariness and an unspoken frustration. He knew that something had changed in the way he viewed life, his mother, and Jason. The next day, Claire sat in her office at Parkside Avenue, staring at the desk where yesterday she had signed important contracts, commanded large projects. But today, none of that mattered anymore. She realized she had overlooked the basics, the values that money and power could never buy: courage, character, and patience. Maria, the building's night supervisor, had seen everything. She knew exactly what had happened and couldn't stay silent. "Claire, I understand how you feel," Maria said, gently patting Claire on the shoulder. "But I also know it's never too late to change." Maria was one of those close to Jason, and she had witnessed the patience and kindness he always showed everyone regardless of how they saw him. Claire only stood silently, her mind still in turmoil, unable to accept that she had been wrong, that she had been too quick to judge people based on their appearances and the work they did. The next day, Claire decided to do something she never thought she would do. She sought out Jason. She went to the doorman's area, a place she had never paid attention to before, where Jason still stood, an indispensable landmark in the Parkside Avenue space. Looking at him, Claire felt a lump in her throat. She didn't know where to start. "Jason," she called, her voice weak. I, I want to thank you." Jason didn't respond immediately. He just stood there, still holding the glass cleaning bottle, and looked at her as if waiting for something. "Thank me for what?" he asked, his voice calm but with something that surprised Claire. He didn't seem proud or expectant of thanks. "For saving Ethan," Claire said, her voice trembling. "I know I don't deserve it, but I can't help but thank you." Jason looked at her for a long moment, saying nothing, just nodding lightly. He stepped closer and placed the bottle on the table, then looked at her with understanding. "Thanking me is enough," he replied, his gaze unchanged. "We do what we can. What matters is not who I save, but that I always do it without regret." Claire stood still, unable to speak another word. Jason's words weren't just a thank you. They were a profound reminder of kindness, of sacrifice that didn't need to be proven or expected from anyone. And now Claire realized no matter what she did, she could never fully undo the mistakes she had made toward him. In that tense atmosphere of regret, Claire couldn't help but reflect on herself, realizing that there were values she had overlooked for far too long. Jason's story about patience, silence, and simple but meaningful actions had changed the way she viewed this world. The entire Parkside Avenue building seemed to be undergoing a transformation, not just with its cold granite walls, but also in the invisible relationships between the residents. As the mornings passed, the sunlight no longer poured through the gleaming glass windows in a lifeless manner. Now that light seemed to reflect the internal changes of the people within. This transformation was ignited by an unexpected event: Jason's courageous act that made everyone reconsider the nature of humanity and what truly matters in life. Claire Langford was still stunned by her encounter with Jason. Although she had expressed her thanks, she couldn't escape the overwhelming sense of guilt and regret rising in her heart. She knew that a single thank you couldn't undo the years she had been indifferent and mocking toward this man. But she also realized that from the moment Jason saved Ethan, everything she had believed to be right for so long had started to crumble. One early morning, as the first rays of sunlight began to peek through the window panes, Claire sat silently in her office, her eyes on the computer screen, but her mind was swirling. She could no longer live under the shadow of her personal successes. She wanted to do something to make up for the indifference she had shown to Jason over the years, and she realized that this couldn't simply be another thank you. With determination in her heart, Claire began making plans. She knew that she couldn't fix all her mistakes, but there was one thing she could do: change how she viewed and treated the people around her, especially Jason. Meanwhile, Jason returned to his work, as if everything that had just happened was merely a part of his life, a moment not too extraordinary that he had grown accustomed to. He continued standing in his place, opening doors for the residents, offering umbrellas when it rained, and greeting everyone with friendly morning wishes. However, his gaze had subtly changed. While still maintaining his calm demeanor, deep inside a small part of his heart had shifted. He couldn't deny that his action in saving Ethan had brought him a new sense of connection with people he once thought would never understand him. Claire approached Jason again. She walked into the doorman's area slowly, a small bag in her hand, feeling anxious just as she had in the beginning. When she saw him standing there, looking at the quiet walls of the building, a lump rose in her throat. She didn't know what to say, but she knew she had to do something. "Jason," she spoke up, her voice slightly trembling, but full of resolve. "I want to invite you to lunch. We need to talk." Jason turned around, his eyes still as calm as always, but there was a flicker of surprise. "Lunch with me?" he asked again, his voice gentle but curious. Claire nodded, her eyes filled with seriousness. "Yes, with you. I know that thank you isn't enough to change what I've done, but I want to do something to make amends. I know there are things that can't be fixed, but at least I can change how I view things." Jason didn't rush to refuse. He stood silently for a moment, then gently replied, "Well, I'll go, but only because I believe that good conversations sometimes help us understand each other better." The next day they sat together in a small cafe near the building where there were no glittering lights of wealth, just soft light from the windows and the intimate atmosphere of an ordinary meeting. Claire began to open up more, talking about the pressures she had been enduring at work, the decisions she had made over the years, and the loneliness she had never shared with anyone. Jason listened to her occasionally, smiling, sometimes just silent. He didn't judge, didn't criticize. He just listened, something Claire hadn't realized was so important all these years. Gradually, Claire felt the tension inside her ease, felt a part of her being freed as she shared the thoughts she had kept hidden for so long. "Thank you," Claire said softly, her eyes focused on her coffee cup. "You didn't just save my son, you saved me from the shadow of myself." Jason didn't say anything, just smiled faintly. "Thank you for trusting me," he replied simply, but profoundly. After that lunch, everything between them seemed to change. Claire was no longer the arrogant, cold woman she had been. She had become more humble. She began to realize that people were not always measured by material things, but by the small actions full of meaning, like what Jason had done. Meanwhile, Jason was no longer just the silent man doing his job. He began to realize that sacrifice wasn't always about recognition, but sometimes recognition could change a life. And though life at Parkside Avenue continued as before, with elevators going up and down and residents coming and going in that space, the relationship between Claire and Jason was no longer just an existence in parallel. It became a real connection, a connection born from empathy, from the deepest and most sincere parts of their hearts. Neither Claire Langford nor Jason Carter knew that a single event would change their lives forever. This change wasn't just in their relationship, but it also served as a powerful push, helping them realize the true values of life that they had never fully understood before. However, the true climax of this story began right after Jason saved Ethan Langford. A week after saving Claire's son, the media began to take notice of Jason. His image appeared in newspapers and television broadcasts, with praise for his courageous act of saving a teenager from a burning car. "Doorman saves teenager from burning car," the headlines read. The image of Jason in his uniform, his face covered in soot from the smoke, holding Ethan in his arms, became a symbol of bravery and sacrifice. However, Jason never wanted to be the center of attention. He continued his work with the same calm attitude as before. Despite being praised and celebrated, he didn't want the accolades. He declined all interview requests and photo opportunities. In a conversation with Maria, the night shift supervisor, Jason simply smiled and said, "We just do what needs to be done, Maria. No need to make a fuss about it." But no matter how much Jason tried to remain silent, the change in how people viewed him was undeniable. The residents of Parkside Avenue began to treat him differently. Those who had previously passed him by as if he were invisible now stopped to greet him and express their gratitude. They no longer saw him as just a doorman in a uniform. They saw a real person, a man of courage and great character. One morning, as sunlight streamed through the building's windows, Claire walked into Parkside Avenue. She was no longer the arrogant woman she had been before. Her eyes had changed. She no longer saw Jason as just a man doing his job anonymously. She realized that he was not the invisible person she once thought him to be. He was a man with all the noble qualities she had ignored for so long. Claire walked up to Jason holding a small bag, and with all sincerity in her voice, she said, "Jason, I want to thank you once again. I'm not only thanking you for saving my son, but also for changing the way I see this world. You don't need the praise, but I want to say that I deeply respect you." Jason smiled, saying nothing, simply looking at her and nodding lightly. He knew that in the end, true recognition and gratitude had come from Claire. And that was what mattered most. Things began to unfold in a way that neither Jason nor Claire had expected. Claire not only changed her perspective on Jason, but she also began to change how she treated everyone around her. She started organizing meetings with the building's residents where she promoted a movement to increase the recognition and respect for people like Jason, those who quietly contributed to the functioning of the entire community, but were often overlooked. Under Claire's leadership, Parkside Avenue became a model of respect and unity. The residents began hosting small parties, informal gatherings to discuss common issues, and most importantly, how to treat the workers in the building. Every time there was a major event, they held recognition ceremonies where people doing silent work like Jason would be honored not just for their job, but also for their character and sacrifice. Jason continued his work still standing in his uniform, always ready to help others. But something had changed in his gaze. He no longer felt like an invisible part of the building. He had been seen not just by the residents, but by himself as well. He realized that courageous acts didn't always need to call for attention, but when recognized, they could change not only one person's life, but an entire community. One afternoon, as Claire passed by Jason after a meeting with the residents, she stopped and looked at him for a long time. No words were necessary. They simply smiled at each other, and in that moment, they understood that they had both changed. No more division, no more disrespect, just understanding and mutual respect. Jason and Claire were no longer strangers in each other's lives. They had become friends deeply, understanding the value of sacrifice, patience, and respect. And from that moment on, their story wasn't just about a man saving the life of a woman's son. It was about the transformation of their own lives, a change rooted in compassion, recognition, and unconditional love.